Welcome everybody to our Singh-Ray webinar of the month. This month we are talking to Vinny Colucci, who is an award-winning photographer. He has been an active photographer since 1979 and a shooting professional since 1995. He has photographed North Carolina to the West Coast and the North to the Canadian Rockies. And along with his wife, Annette, Vinny connects nature and wildlife photography workshops throughout the year. Vinny is an active outdoorsman and a member of Nikon's Professional Service and Wimberley Professional Service, Think Tank, Mindshift affiliate, and technical advisor, as well as being a Singh-Ray filter ambassador and technical advisor. His images have appeared in multiple publications, including Nature Photographer Magazine, New Bern Travel Magazine, Microwave Journal, Smoky Mountain Journal, and various other publications. He has also co-authored multiple books, and he has speaking engagements across the country, including Popular Photography Magazine, Recreational Equipment Incorporated, and the Birding Festival in Orlando, which I know Vinny loves to shoot at. So did I capture everything there, Vinny?
I think you enough. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
So we're going to talk tonight about photographing the Milky Way, star trails, and the moon.
Are we all set, Michelle?
So,
well, first off, I want to thank Michelle for putting this together for all of us. It takes a lot of technical work to get us to be able to communicate and share and explore all of our passions in photography. And I want to especially thank Singh-Ray Filter, their entire staff, for hosting this and helping put this together. My hat's off to everybody at Singh-Ray Filters, and thank you again on behalf of all of us. And then third, thank you all for signing up and listening to me to talk for about an hour. As my wife always says, I seemingly love to talk to people. So here I am. So I can't see you. I see my screen. I think Michelle said you guys could see me. And maybe that's the only negative of the whole program. You get to watch my face a little bit. But if you focus on what we're doing, I want to make sure that sometimes I'm going to point things out. I'm moving it slowly, but my mouse pointer is now set up so I can show you things like the little moon over in Arches National Park, Balance Rock. And we'll get on with the show here. Feel free to answer or ask questions. I'll answer as many as I can. And this program is about photographing and you know, it's not really a software program or processing program, but at the end I will talk about that a little bit and lead into hopefully doing one of those sometime in the future. So here we go. Photographing the Milky Way, star trails, and the moon. But we will start with the moon because that's the easiest for all of us to work with. The moon is our first step into photographing the heavens. Typical equipment for photographing the moon, obviously a camera, some kind of large telephoto lens. And I said, you know, 100 to 600, but the more you have, the better off you are. So, you know, I do a lot of photographing with my Nikon 500 PF now. Great lens for photographing the moon and nice and lightweight. I used to use my 600 f4 quite a bit. All of it gets mounted on a sturdy tripod with, I like a gimbal head particularly when doing large telephoto lens, but a good solid ball head. I want to say this about a tripod, and this applies as we work our way from the moon, you know, to the stars. Make sure your tripod is not underweight. I see a lot of folks in photography workshops and you know, they'll buy really expensive equipment and really cheapen up on the tripod and the ball head. Here's just a general rule of thumb, and it's just something to keep in mind. I use the 20% rule. So if I look at my tripod and my gimbal head, and I look at the minimum, this one, as far as the maximum weight it could hold. For example, my Wimberley gimbal head, you know, could easily hold 50 pounds, but if I have it on a tripod that could only hold 20 pounds, my 20% rule leans towards the tripod, not the gimbal head. So 20% of 20 pounds capability, we're looking at the maximum I'm going to put on that tripod is 16 pounds, so I can maximize the stability of the tripod. So don't, especially when you're using long telephoto lenses, don't underweight your tripod. Make sure you have a tripod that can hold your equipment. A good friend of mine, Bill Fortney, always said the best tripod you have is the one that you hate to carry because it's too heavy, but that's the one that's going to get you the best images. Also for moon photography, I do like to use a 2-stop ND filter, neutral density filter, to sort of cut down on the light. And if you're into astronomy, I've done some work with telescopes, and that's another option besides a long telephoto lens to get some really good moon images. Just to point out the telescope, a telescope, most of them, like this TeleVue 85, is a fixed f8 telescope. Really just becomes a fixed f8 telephoto lens. And I treat it as such. It's a manual focus lens. And we have to be careful to have a sturdy enough tripod to cut down the vibration that a telescope could amplify. And that's the only thing to be aware of. But the techniques we're going to talk about work exactly the same as if you were shooting through a camera lens. The moon is bright, guys, and it's very reflective. It's reflecting sunlight, and it should be treated as being reflecting sunlight as far as our exposure is concerned. So just a little bit of a lesson here, and not that we have to follow this to get shots, or some people might. We used to say, and it still applies, and I call it the sun formula, f16, 1 over our ISO, gives us our shutter speed. So theoretically, if your metering system in the camera wasn't working at all, we know at f16, if we're shooting at ISO 400, I could shoot at 1/400th of a second and I'll have a perfect exposure. And guys, that works even outside. If you have even sunlight someplace, you could just set that number up and you're going to have a perfect exposure. If we were shooting at ISO 800, my shutter speed would be 1/800th of a second at f16 to get a perfect exposure. And then we could translate any direction. For example, if we wanted to shoot at f8 with our ISO 400 setup, f8 means that we're opening the lens up and we're going to shoot letting more light in. We're going to let twice the light in, so we have to shoot at twice the shutter speed. So the formula just follows back and forth, and you don't even have to meter if you don't want to get a proper exposure of sun reflection off the moon. And but a lot of times what we do is we meter through our camera, which is what most of us do for the practicality of going out and taking the shots. This all works whether you, in this case, you're manually metering or if you're using one of the program, aperture priority, shutter priority, or program mode. We can meter through our camera and our lens, whether it's a telephoto lens or a telescope. What's really important here, though, is getting this metering right so that you end up with a really good exposure and not something that's over bright. You remember I mentioned that I like to use an ND filter. The reason I like to use an ND filter, and this is really important if you're shooting an SLR, not a mirrorless camera. If you're shooting an SLR and you're looking through the viewfinder, I don't care if you stop down to f16 or f22. When you look through the viewfinder, you're looking at the reflection of the moon wide open, and you could actually damage your eye on a full moon on a bright night. So having a 2-stop ND filter in astronomy, they put usually around a 2-stop ND filter on the eyepiece, again, to tame the light and protect your eye. If you're shooting with a mirrorless camera, or if you're shooting in live view on the back of your SLR and you're not looking through the viewfinder, you could probably just stop down until you get the exposure in. I have a tendency to leave the 2-stop ND filter on there. again, so I'm not fighting the light. I'm not, forcing a way under exposure to get things in. It's sort of like wearing sunglasses when you're out in bright light. And the laws of physics works the same. So cut the light down just a little bit, and a really good high grade ND filter, obviously like a Singh-Ray filter, will get you a little bit better results than trying to shoot and tone down your image by underexposing. So I do recommend the two-stop ND filter.
So Vinny,
In front of your lens.
Can you substitute a CP for the ND?
A polarizing filter? I didn't hear that, Michelle. Please repeat it.
Can you substitute a circular polarizer for the ND filter?
Yes, you could. Actually, a polarizer, it's not going to polarize anything because, we're not offset from the sun to the moon. But a polarizer is just a dark filter. And if you go to fully polarized, the fully polarized position, you're going to lose about a stop and a half. To some polarizers, 2 stops of light. So yeah, that'll work. It's just like putting a pair of sunglasses on in this case. But you want to use a high quality filter. And so yeah, that would absolutely work. I would not use both. If you have a polarizer on there, and I've done that, just use that to tame down the light, and it'll act as an ND filter at that point. Any other questions regarding that? Okay. Again, just what's important is the polarizer is not going to polarize. It's just going to act as an ND filter. And also keep in mind that it's not fully polarized. In one position, it might only be about 1 stop. So again, be a little careful, particularly if you're looking through an SLR, which is looking through the lens, not through, basically a video of the subject. Vibration and focus sharpness. When we start talking about stars later, we'll talk about using a cable release particularly, so that we're not touching our camera and introducing vibrations. I actually, for the moon, just as when I'm photographing wildlife, I actually don't use a cable release. I actually, with a higher telephoto lens, put my hand on top of the lens. I keep my hand on the shutter of the camera body, and I actually add pressure to the top of the lens. And this sort of dampens the vibration. This technique works for me. I have colleagues, though, that still prefer when they're photographing the moon to use a cable release or a timer to release, and they also seem to get good results. It's more of my style, and it's just Vinny's way. It's not necessarily the only way. So this is what's worked for me to get that sharpness and get the vibration minimized as much as possible. White balance. People ask me all the time about white balance. I have a tendency to, when I photograph anything in nature, to leave my white balance set to cloudy. Yes, even on a sunny day. I like that little extra warmth that it adds, particularly if I'm forced to do a shot when it's not late in the day or early in the morning when the light is really at its best. But even at night, photographing the moon, which is what? Reflective sunlight. If I add that little extra warmth with a cloudy setting, I get a little color to the moon, like what you see here. I have a tendency to focus on the craters, and we'll talk about depth of field in just a second, so that I get the pronounced craters, particularly towards the edges, really, really sharp. But the white balance, I usually leave set to cloudy, just my style. I would recommend also maybe trying auto white balance or sunny white balance to see if you like that even better, but we'll show that in just a second. Depth of field is really important. It's not like shooting stars where we're shooting really wide open. We're shooting with a telephoto lens. And some people like to shoot, wide open with a telephoto lens. Remember, we're dealing with a fairly bright subject, even at, a moon that's half phased, or the light that's coming off of it's really, really bright. So it's not a matter of not having enough light. It's a matter of getting what you want in and out of focus. if you look at the photo at the left, there's a little bit of softness to it away from the craters on the right where I was focused on. This is through actually a telescope that was an f8 telescope. There's not quite enough depth of field at that magnification, and probably had a little, because telescopes have a tendency to introduce a little extra vibration if you're not careful.
We have a question from Marshall.
Yeah. Hey, Marshall.
Marshall wants to know, is it better to focus on craters than on the edge? Can't you get better contrast for focusing if you use the edge?
Yeah, and if you go back and look at this image, you could see right over here, this is where I focused, somewhere towards the edge. If you try to get the very edge where, over here we have a pronounced edge, but over here where it fades back into the darkness, I really wanted these. Now over here, Marshall, I actually focused on these craters because they were very pronounced, but I used f11 on my 500 millimeter lens, and you can see the entire image is in focus. Whereas I tried to focus up in here with the telescope, and I was probably somewhere around f8 with that telescope, and it started to fall off over here and get a little soft. So I do use depth of field to try to pull that in and out, and I try to, where the craters are the most clustered, that's where I have a tendency to focus. If I had a full moon, I'd probably be looking at the edge like Marshall suggests. Did that answer what he wanted?
I believe so.
Okay. I'm not going to get into a lot of things on reading the histogram and exposure today, but I will point this out, and this applies when we get to stars. If you properly look at your histogram on a fairly regular basis, we know that the histogram exposure is midtones to white and midtones all the way to black. Whether it's a bunch of stars, or in this case the moon, this is a big giant spike of black. You know why? Because see all this? It's all black. This is how much of that tone is there. And this moon, and there's different shades of the moon as it goes through, that's what's filling the data down in here. And there's probably a hot spot in there. Some places we have a little spike. But the moon, relative to the rest of the scene, is very small. The black to the rest of the scene is very high. Now, when you look at a histogram of stars, it's very similar. You're going to get a big spike over here and maybe a couple of little blips if it picks up some of the stars over there. So what I'm really looking for in a histogram when I'm doing star photography, in this case moon photography, is that I'm getting something down in here up to here, and it's not just chopped off. So if this is chopped off and the data stops, then I know I'm probably way underexposed, and I need to up the exposure until I get these little things to fill in a little bit. That's really something for people to be aware of if they check their histogram. Because let's face it, when we're out there at night, again, whether it's the moon or the stars and it's dark out, the back of our monitors look great. We could be 2 stops underexposed and it's still going to look good. And then you get it on your computer, it's like, wow, I'm way underexposed. So this is a way to know that you're getting something up this high end, particularly when it's bright. And that's important, that you sort of know what you're getting there.
Brian says, I've read that it's best to take photos of the moon the day before it's full, so there's more contrast with the craters. What is your experience with that?
Say that again slowly, because you cut out for a second.
I've read that it's best to take photos of the moon the day before it's full, so that there is more contrast with the craters.
Absolutely. The day before or even the day after. Full moon is really tough to shoot. And that's why it's also important to have that 2-stop ND filter on there at a full moon.
Right.
His point is well taken. That's why a lot of my moon shots are someplace either before or after where we get that extra contrast on. And his name was Brian. He's right. This is great stuff right here. This, you can see where it's getting bright. It's hard to get the contrast and the detail. This is great stuff right in here. So yeah, I also believe in trying to shoot before the moon is full. You're going to get a nicer looking photograph.
And then John wanted to know, how do you determine what f-stop your telescope is?
The telescope manufacturer will let you know what your telescope is.
Okay.
Yeah, like a Celestron 8 Cassegram, they're f11. by specification. TeleVue 85 is f8, and it's not a variable f-stop. It's what you,
It's not a guessing game. You
right.
get a hold of the manufacturer and they'll let you know.
So setting, and it's usually right in the specifications. You know, if it's a decent scope like the TeleVue 85 that I showed, it's on the nameplate on the scope. You know, all the focal length and the f-stop of the optics.
Oh.
Setting your white, you know, we talked about white balance before, that I liked a little bit of a cloudy, but some people do like that cold lunar look. This was, you know, done with auto white balance. This isn't a conversion to black and white. This is cloudy. This is, you know, auto white balance. I'd get the same look probably if I set it to sunny or something close to it, but auto white balance just pulls out all the color. It gives you that cold lunar look, which a lot of people like. It's just what your preference is. We could use white balance as a set of filters to be creative. You know, go out and shoot a couple of different white balances and see what you get. You might be surprised on the creative look that you achieve. A lot of people are afraid to play with white balance. White balance is nothing more than a set of filters that's built into your camera. And we didn't have that option back in film days. We could change our film to get different effects, but basically we used warming filters and different fluorescent filters if we were shooting in fluorescent lights. Now we have some of those filters built into the camera, and it's called white balance. So the moon becomes a great first step. Why? Because it's easy. It's easy. It's not moving that much. We could auto focus on it, even though I prefer to manually focus on it. And your autofocus will lock onto it fine. We could play with the exposures and some ND filters to make sure we get what we want. We obviously play with white balance to get the effect that we want. You know, obviously a little color. And, you know, when you're out enjoying photographing the moon itself, you never know what you're going to get, you know, whether it's an airplane flying over or hopefully staying a clear night. Or, you know, back in Christmas Eve, I was out photographing the moon and managed to capture this. So it made me the best papa ever to my grandkids. So go out and have some fun photographing the moon as you move into photographing the heavens. So we will now move into our night sky, because we're going to start talking about star trails in a little bit. One of the things with night sky is we can have fun with stars without star trails and Milky Ways and just getting good star shots. And all these techniques will achieve some of that as we get through this program. And in this case, this is upper and lower Yosemite Falls, and you get this by bringing a lot of mag lights out there and lighting it. I know I can't hear people chuckle, but getting used to me. Michelle, you could chuckle, make me feel good. But yeah, knowing what your conditions are allow you to get different things. In this case, it was a full moon rise in Yosemite, and we the group got this type of shot. And still got those stars up above, which is what this is about. So star trails, equipment. The same camera is just fine. And sturdy tripod with a ball head. My little 20% formula still rules. Wide angle lens, 14 to 24 is a good range. Some people use a 24 to 70. You could get good, you know, star trail shots, 24 to 50 millimeters. If you start to telephoto too much, the effect isn't as pleasing. Cable release. Here I start to introduce a cable release because we're going to start to look at longer exposures and not touching our camera and introducing vibrations. And we're going to talk about Singh-Ray's Astro filter, which has become an awesome filter. If I'm doing star photography or Milky Way photography, I don't go anywhere without my Singh-Ray Astro filter. And we'll see some of the things that could do too. And you need some kind of timer watch or, you know, stopwatch. I use my iPhone, you know, just the timer on the iPhone to do some of this, and it works fine. So it's not you know, if you off a second or two, it's not going to change the exposure that much. So the Singh-Ray Astro filter, I do want to talk about that a little bit, because it really, when we're talking about star photography, reduces or eliminates light pollution, which is a real problem. So unless you're, you know, at Logan's Pass in Glacier National Park or in the middle of the field in Yellowstone or someplace really, really dark, we all have to contend with light pollution. So this filter really does clean up and minimizes the need for cleanup post-processing. If you don't own or you can't invest in a Singh-Ray Astro filter right away, the high lux filter, which is less money, not really designed for astrophotography, but does pull a little light pollution out and it adds some contrast. So I've used that filter before Singh-Ray came out with this filter.
And that one has a little bit of a warming effect too, just a little.
It does. It does. It's a great filter. In fact, this filter is so good. I've used it. Sometimes I do street photography and lots of light pollution. Yellow lights down, like a downtown that you might be photographing, walking around, taking tourist type shots. I've put this on and it really tames down some of that yellow that you get, which again reduces the amount of post-processing I have to do later on. So really good filter, not just for star photography. So camera setup. This becomes a little bit important, particularly when we start looking at longer exposures. So your exposure, all your cameras in your menus allow you to make, either add noise reduction or high ISO noise reduction due to long exposure or high ISO in the camera. But that's a process. Basically, the camera's doing Photoshop internally. So when you start doing longer exposures, particularly if we start doing like stacking long exposures or just running it for a long time, it adds to the processing internal to the camera and adds unnecessary time. So I turn those off. And if I have to do some cleanup, I do that in post-processing, if I have to reduce some noise. But our cameras are so clean, and we're typically shooting around ISO 800 to sometimes 2400, but in there, I do a lot of work at ISO 1200. It's not that noisy if you get the exposure right, if you're not too underexposed where you have to brighten it up when you get back. And so I turn these off in the camera and don't worry about them for this type of thing. Your lens aperture, also important. The best lenses are f2.8 or faster. If you have a 1.8 lens, even better. But I've gotten really good results with f4 lenses. I've even gotten some results with 5.6 lenses. But as you start to get lenses that are higher f-stops, like a 5.6 lens, you have to have higher ISOs, and that starts to add some noise back into, especially shooting at night. So the faster the lens, the better. The more light you can collect in star photography, the better. So yeah, turning this off in your menu, just check your manual. If you have a Nikon, because I'm primarily a Nikon shooter, feel free to email me. You'll have my email at the end of this program. I'll be glad to even get on the phone and talk you through things. So I'm accessible after this as far as additional questions or if you need help with your setups.
When someone asked here, are the slides going to be available after the webinar? So Vinny, can we put these in a PDF when we're done?
I will put these in a PDF and I was going to talk about this at the very end. And I'll mention it again. If you want a PDF of this program, send me your email, or Michelle, if you want me to handle it all through Singh-Ray, I'd be glad to create a PDF of this.
Yeah, just email the file and I'll include it in the email that goes out tonight.
You will have that file 15 minutes after everybody stops asking questions tonight.
Perfect.
Okay. Another thing we have to be careful for, really careful, particularly in mirrorless cameras, when you look through a viewfinder, and a lot of times we turn the electronic grid on, that grid is really bright, what makes it nearly impossible to spot stars through an electronic viewfinder or in live view. But even with SLRs, if you have your grid on when you turn it on, it's going to be hard to compose and see stars. So I make sure I turn that grid off. You can do that in the menu. All this other stuff, you could turn off in most cameras also. Some cameras, I've tried some of my workshop folks' cameras, and a few of them wouldn't turn all this off. So with SLRs, when you're not dealing with where you have to look through an electronic viewfinder, I do my composition with the camera turned off, because you're just looking through the lens and you can see the stars fine. And then I turn everything on and get my exposure straight and everything. And something like a mirrorless camera where you're forced to look through an electronic viewfinder, I just turn as much as my camera allows to turn off, but particularly the grid, because those grids get really bright when you're outside and it's dark outside. That's just something we have to do, and something we have to live with when we're dealing with mirrorless cameras, is we don't have that SLR option. Image stabilization. Well, let's shake it up a little bit. VR, image stabilization, should be turned off when we're doing long exposures on a tripod. I didn't really care with the moon that much, because the little bit of vibration that might happen when you're even holding it with my technique. But really, when you're doing star photography, the VR or image stabilization should be turned off. Now note this, our cameras are getting better and better. We have image stabilization that can be turned off in the lenses and or in the camera bodies. You need to have them turned off on both. Otherwise, it's going to look for vibration, and it may introduce vibration in its search. And that's usually, you can take 10 images, and the one where it shook a little bit and made a little soft was the one you really wanted to keep. So I recommend you turn that off, so everything is nice and stable, and you don't really need the VR turned on, because you're not going to be touching the camera during the exposure time. Autofocus or not. We talked about autofocus with the moon. You could use autofocus on the moon because it's big and it's bright, but on stars, I strictly do manual focus, and sometimes it's really hard to manual focus on stars. So we really want our lenses to be at the infinity point. And we should use a cable release when we do these exposures. And our infinity point on some lenses are marked. And the better the lens, the more accurate this is. But if we look here to the far left, if I was manually focusing this to, I'm not even looking at the stars, focusing this to infinity as I approach it, I end up here. And it has to be dead center on the infinity point. Now here's what people forget, and this is where they end up with soft stars. Because our lenses are designed for autofocus, they don't stop at infinity. They actually overdrive a little bit. It's part of the autofocus thing. And we've all heard it. We could be focused on a grizzly bear out there, and you autofocus, and it sort of goes past the point a little bit and comes back and locks in. Well, that overage means that if I just racked it over in the darkness to infinity and to as far as it'll go, I'm going to be past that infinity point and have a soft image. So you really have to make sure that you're right on that infinity point, so that your stars at infinity are pinpoint. Now, that being said, it's dark out and you don't want to turn on white light. So I do wear a headlight, and I use a red light. Usually it has two modes, white light, red light. So I can take a quick look at something like this and make sure that I'm on the infinity point. And then I make sure that I'm switched to manual focus on the camera body and or on the lens, so that I don't accidentally touch the shutter button and it tries to find something out there.
We had a few questions on stabilization and vibration.
Okay.
From Bruce, do you know how to turn off image stabilization on a Nikon Z7?
On a Z7? Yeah, if you go, you see this little icon here? It's on the back of your camera. If you hit that, you're gonna, and I don't have a way to pull it up right now, but if you hit that, it'll open up a menu which has, your metering and a few other things in there. You'll see where there's a little hand that shakes. That's your image stabilization. If you click that on, it'll allow you to turn image stabilization in the body off on the Z7 or the Z6. If you're shooting a lens that has image stabilization in it, if you happen to be using an F-mounted lens with the FTZ adapter on the Nikon, you have to turn it off on the lens itself to make sure that the lens itself is not trying to image stabilize.
And then do you use mirror lock up to reduce vibration?
When I was using SLRs, I'm shooting strictly mirrorless. when I was shooting SLRs. I did use mirror lockup on some of my long exposure stuff, but actually not on this stuff, because you're going to be in 20 to 30 seconds. Mirror lockup was originally designed for the old film cameras back in the 70s and 80s, because there was an inherent vibration between 1/30th of a second and 1 second. And the only way to get rid of it was mirror lockup. They left it in a lot of the pro cameras, even though it wasn't quite as necessary as cameras got better and better and better. But when you're starting to deal with 25 second exposures, that little bit of vibration until the camera settles down is never going to be on the exposure point when we're dealing with such dark things. So no, not anymore. I don't use mirror lockup like I used to do. Okay. And it hasn't affected anything that I've shot with astrophotography. I wanted to make this point on mirrorless cameras. Some of the mirrorless kit lenses, like somebody was talking about the Z camera, the Z 14 to 30, which is a great lens. It's an f4 lens, but I got really good results out of it. Doesn't have markings on the lens to find the infinity point. But when you switch the camera to manual, in your viewfinder or in live view, this little bar comes up. So as I focus towards infinity, it starts to creep up. If you look at where my pointer is on the left, starts to creep up and approach infinity, and then just gets to infinity. Here's the trick. You don't want to keep spinning it once it hits here. So you sort of want to slowly approach that infinity point, and you'll sort of see that bar click in, and then just stop. Don't keep turning the manual focus ring. And then you'll be at infinity. And again, using that technique, I've had no problem getting pinpoint stars. When we're doing long exposures, again, because we're moving into the star trail thing, we need our cameras do not expose longer than 30 seconds. So if we're doing the Milky Way, we don't have to use bulb. We could, pick a time, and manually, like 20 seconds or 10 seconds or up to 30 seconds. But after that, we have to go into a bulb setting. What the bulb setting allows you to do is, if I pressed my shutter and held it down, it'll stay open until I release the shutter. Well, with a cable release, all the cable releases come with a lock. So I could press the shutter and lock it. So if I needed to do a 10-minute exposure, I could lock it, time it on my iPhone stopwatch or whatever you're timing with, and then release it at that time and have that fairly accurate exposure. And I do that with long exposures, for moving water. I do that for infrared shots, and in star photography, I use bulb so that I could do, if I need to do an hour exposure, I could do an hour exposure. Or a 90-minute exposure, I can do that with bulb. A lot of the mirrors cameras now have something called time, and I still use bulb just because I've done it for years. The time allows you to, some of them, some of them allow you to put a time in, like 5 minutes, 30 seconds. Some of them allow you to hit the time and it stays locked on, and then you have to hit it again for it to release. Again, 65 years old. I'm not going to change my method now. I just go into bulb and lock it with my shutter release. But you could try any of those techniques and it'll work fine for you. But the shutter release is really important for doing this. Exposure time and aperture. Set your exposure to bulb. To get a circular pattern for star trails, we need to aim our camera north to Polaris. I use an app, I forget the name of it, called Sky Guide on my iPhone. And Sky Guide allows me to find Polaris fairly easy. Now, I got to be honest, you don't have to be super accurate. If you're off a little bit, you're going to still get some really nice circular star trails. But if you could get the middle of your telephoto lens, or not your wide angle lens, centered on Polaris, you're going to have awesome star trails. So if you could get that app, Sky Guide, they have it for the Apple phones, they have it for Android and a few others. It'll be much easier to find that north direction to get the circular
like it.
star. Now, your focus ring, set to infinity, not past the mark. It has to be on that infinity point. Aperture set as wide as possible. Unlike the moon, where we were stopping down to get depth of field, the camera looks at the sky as a flat surface because it's so far away. So being at f2.8, if you're sharp on one star, you're going to be sharp on the other one. If you're sharp on the other star, you're going to be sharp on a planet that just looks like a bigger star. F8, F2, F4. Again, I've shot a lot of things recently. F4 with my Z cameras. And if you have something faster, it's even better. If you have a 1.8 lens, that's even better if it's wide enough for what you need to do. ISO, anyways, between 800 and 1600 seems to work well. I do a lot of stuff at 1200 and 1600, and but I've gotten good results up at 2400. I have some colleagues that shoot stuff at 6400. The noise in our cameras, if you get the exposure decent, are really, really clean. It's not like years and years ago. So don't be afraid of the ISO if that's what you need to collect light. If you're shooting a 5.6 lens, you're going to be up over 2400 for sure to collect starlight, and you'll get good stuff. Don't be afraid to try that. With your shutter cable, lock your shutter open. Leave your shutter open in the case of circular star trails from 60 to 90 minutes. The longer you keep it open, the more circular pattern you're going to get. Theoretically, if you kept it open 24 hours, we'd have complete closed circles. Hard to do. The sun comes up in the morning, even if you wanted to. So it's going to ruin your exposure. But in theory, the revolution is a full 24 hours. But you get really good star trails from 60 to 90 minutes. Look at some of that. Like this. Here's a 75-minute exposure. And it starts to fill in by itself. Ambient light will start to collect, if there's a town in the distance or somebody turns a flashlight on and paints light, and you're going to have to be concerned with some of that. But this is important. Like here, it was a very calm day, and this is very, very stationary. But here, I need you to be really careful, because here's some star trails, and they look really, really good. This is about 2 in the morning. But look at this. Look how soft this is. And that's not because of focus. I wasn't trying to do depth of field, but it was a little breezy that night. And that's what that's about. So you need to be a little bit careful. Also, you can see the circular star trails are starting to flatten out. The further you move away from Polaris, either to the west or to the east, the straighter the lines come. You could almost get close to horizontal star trails if you go full east. So whatever effect you're looking to get. But this movement was mostly due to the wind. You got to be. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There's a tip from Lee. He says, project the end of the pan stars of the Big Dipper to find Polaris. And it's also at the bottom V of Cassiopeia points to Polaris.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
You're going for the old school.
But a lot of people, if they're not into astronomy, need a quick way to do this without becoming astronomers. Getting that little app. And listen, when I was first starting to do this, I got some great star trails. I took a compass, found north, and just, years and years ago, I wasn't that into knowing the constellations. Just sort of got north and still got some really good star trails. I wasn't completely pointed north here just because the opening in the trees, and you can see there's still somewhat circular. But yeah, those, if you're into astronomy and know your constellations, that is an exacting comment right there. That's good information to have. Thank you for sharing that. This is at Grandfather Mountain. This is 6 10-minute exposures stacked in software. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just let it rip for 60 seconds or, 60 minutes or 90 minutes or 100 minutes? Well, one of the reasons is if I had, nobody, please don't get mad at me. If I had a less expensive digital camera, might even have a great sensor. I'm going to pick on the D500, which is a great digital camera. The D500, for example, is very well heat sinked. The D5 is even better heat sink, or a D4 or a D3. a D7200 or a 7500, which uses same sensor, same quality, isn't as heat sinked inside as some of the upper end cameras. So you start to get heating noise in places along the edges. So by stacking 10-minute exposures, and letting it cool down for 20 seconds and doing another exposure for 10 minutes and letting it cool down for 20 seconds, you eliminate on those other cameras the chance of the sensor heating up and having heated sensors, and it eliminates you having to crop that stuff out later.
That's smart.
All right.
Can you use a filter on the 14 to 24?
Yes, the Nikon 14 to 20. The Nikon 14 to 24 f lens and Canon's their version of that for SLRs. You can't put a screw-on filter. However, there's a couple of companies that make filter holders, and then you could put one is I'm sorry, Singh-Ray staff, but
no, it's okay. We recommend it too.
Yeah, the Lee filter has an adapter that allows you to put a like 150 by 150 Singh-Ray filter will slide in there, ND filter in front of that lens, and it works great.
They make a great holder.
I got excited for a second because the Z 14 to 30 is the first 14 millimeter lens that I've ever seen that you can put a screw-on polarizer, you can put on an ND filter, you can put on a normal filter on that. But the other filters, for those that don't know those lenses, they're 2.8 lenses, like the 14 to 24. It's a convex lens. In other words, basically it bows out. It's not a flat front lens.
Right.
And most of them have this built-in lens hood that's permanent, so you can't take that off. And so you need the special adapter. And there's another company that makes that, and it might be, I'm trying to think, it might be Tiffin might actually make an adapter that allows you to put a filter in front of those. And again, it's those 150 by 150 filters because it's a large filter holder, and Singh-Ray will make those filter sizes for you.
John says Nisi makes a 150 millimeter filter holder.
Who does that one?
It says NISI, Nisi.
Okay, yeah, that's true. They do make that also. I had moved away from SLRs when the Z7 and Z6 was sent to me, and so I haven't gotten to play with some of those new filter holders because the Z camera I could put a regular filter on, and for 14.
Bruce says the Z 14 to 30 is flat, so you can use filters.
Right, the 14 to 30 to Z is flat, and you can put regular filter screw right on the front. And that's the first wide angle lens at 14 millimeters that I've seen that you could do that. So the optical formula in that lens is excellent. The other reason to stack I want to mention is because by having some shorter times glued together, there's less noise. When you stack them and blend them in Photoshop, you'll end up with an image with less digital noise in the sky. So that seems to help that. That also helps if you stack Milky Way shots, even if it's the same shot. You just stack 10, 15, 20 of those together, you'll get a smoother transition. Because you have to be careful, for those of you that do post-processing, when you use noise reduction software with stars, sometimes the noise reduction software takes out the stars. It thinks it's noise, particularly the fainter ones. So you've got to be a little careful with some of that processing. So stacking, exposure stacks actually help quite a bit with that. Okay, Milky Way. Everybody loves the Milky Way. This was out in New Mexico at the Very Large Array, and I was fortunate enough that these clouds moved away, and I was able to get part of the Milky Way that night. And it was right after sunset, so I still had the sun setting, and I was really lucky that they turned an antenna in the direction that I really wanted them to turn it. So you get a little lucky with that. But equipment we need for that is very similar to star trails. I did put in here with the Milky Way, if you don't own an Astro filter, the clear Hilux filter is better than not having any filter at all. Everything else is pretty much the same. And again, the rule of thumb, I call out f2.8 lenses and, you know, f4s and stuff. But if you have a faster lens, it's better. The faster the lens, the better. The less ISO you really need to use with a faster lens, hence the less noise that you pick up. But the sturdy tripod's really important. Again, cable release, and again, my trusty iPhone stopwatch. So, all the stuff I said before about turning off the noise reduction in the camera and the ISO noise reduction in the camera, that all still applies here. Here's a typical setup. F4 would be the minimum I would recommend using. VR is off. Again, I'm going to remind you that that's important. Cable release. Your shutter speed probably isn't going to be faster than 30 seconds. You know, I've done some, depending on the focal length I pick, that with 32, 33. But usually I end up somewhere under 30 seconds. And that is really dependent on the focal length of the lens that you're picking. So we need a little formula. Everybody ready for some more math here? To know the maximum you could go in time without your stars starting to move or create star trails, because now with the Milky Way, we want pinpoint stars, is 500 divided by the focal length of the lens gives you the time in seconds. So if I have a 14 mm lens, it means the longest I'm ever going to hold it open is 35.7 seconds. That doesn't mean I can't, you know, I can't go faster. If my ISO is high enough, I could certainly do a 25-second shot or a 20-second shot. But if I do a 39 or 40-second shot, if I look close at the stars, you're going to see that they start to egg shape a little bit. So this is really to come up with the maximum time. If I have a crop sensor, because this has to do with angle of view on the star, a crop sensor, for example, if it's a 1.5 multiplier, it's 500 divided by, in this case, this example, 14 millimeters times 1.5. And you can see because that crop sensor is now making my 14 millimeter a little bit more telephoto, I'm going to have a shorter maximum time. I can't go over, you know, 23.8 seconds. So I'm going to be looking and striving to have something that's on the, you know, closer to 20 seconds or less if I could do it. So those are the formulas that are important because we want star points, whether the Milky Way is there or not. This is El Capitan, a little moon glow to help light that up, and still nice stars. This is a full frame, D800, 24 millimeters at 20.8 seconds at ISO 1600. And that's what we got. The long exposure also allowed the river smoothing out, and that was just a little gift. Okay, light pollution, our #1 culprit with star photography. The Singh-Ray Astro filter really helps. This is a spot my wife and I found. We were on 81 in Virginia, headed home, and stopped with our camper. We were camping, wanted to do some Milky Way stuff. The Milky Way was up. And we found this, and I picked this particular one because we didn't like this with flashlights. This was because the Milky Way was rising over this hill in the mountains, and to the far left, about a half a mile away, maybe less, maybe a quarter mile away, was a gas station. So this is lit by the gas station, because again, we're going to do a long exposure of about 20 seconds. So it was going to light this up. But you see this? You see how yellow it looks? Okay. Watch the difference. I did almost no post-processing with this. This is pretty much out of the camera. A little contrast maybe. Maybe touched up the exposure if it was a little bit underexposed. I don't remember exactly. But the Astro filter, look at the difference.
Wow.
That's a huge difference for one filter to make. Even here where the artificial light was lighting up the trees, it did tame this. It doesn't take it all away, but look at the Milky Way. Now, if I went into post-processing and some of the softwares I'll talk about later, you know, I can increase the reds and really make this pop and do whatever creative thing I want to do. But this is just out of the camera in a highly
Look at all that
polluted.
time you don't have to spend in post-processing now.
What was that?
I said, look at all that time you don't have to spend in post-processing now.
Right. I mean, this is almost a sellable image the way it is. If it was, maybe a better foreground, but it's a great example of what that filter can do.
Much better starting point, either
Yep.
way.
Yep. And that's what we're looking for with filters. Listen, I love using filters in the field, sunrises, sunsets, all that stuff. And people say, well, you could do all that in post-processing, and you can. And I'm not taking away from that. But I've done a couple of webinars for Singh-Ray and for you guys. I typically spend 30 seconds or less on every image. If I have to spend more than 30 seconds, that's just not me. I did it that way with film all my life, and that's the way I shoot. Now, that doesn't mean people that want to do a lot of post-processing, they can create a lot better images than mine because their post-processing is better. That's okay. But look at this as a starting point versus this. So whether you like to do a lot of post-processing or not, I love this filter. It really does its job.
On that, what white balance did you use?
Excuse me?
What white balance did you use?
Actually, on this filter, when I did this test, this was actually on auto white balance because, I'm sorry, on sunny white balance because I wanted the yellow from the white pollution, not from my normal, I left it on cloudy. Right. So this was on sunny white balance, and this is what I got. This is light pollution from the town that's way back here. This is light pollution from the gas station that was to the far left. And this is what the filter did. And you can see the town light coming out from behind that mountain. There's a lot of light pollution there that the filter couldn't get out, but it really rescued my Milky Way. Hey, listen, in all of this, I do a lot of horizontals with Milky Way shots, but don't forget to do a vertical once in a while. It's just, sometimes you get a different look. And that's all this point was, is don't just, the best time to do a vertical is right after you shoot horizontal, or vice versa. So that's in any photography. But I wanted to point this out. If you're in really dark skies, and this is just straight up, no foreground, no nothing, really dark skies, the more dark it is and the less light pollution there is, the less filter you actually can get away with. But here, this is the Hilux filter, and this is the Astro filter. You can see there is a real, and it depends on your monitors that you're looking at this, but on my monitor, I can see this is a shift with the Astro filter, and on my monitor, this image looks better than this image, as far as still filtering out some yellow light pollution. Now, some people might like that, but this is with a Hilux filter, which does help the contrast of all this.
And for star trails and Milky Way, is your default white balance still cloudy?
For my normal shooting, yes. Unless I forcibly do something different. It's just, I just leave it on that all the time for wildlife and nature. It's just me, so the filter actually still filters out that white balance. And a lot of people don't realize that. That's another reason I don't use auto white balance, because if you put a filter in front, like the Astro filter or a warming filter, if you're photographing a sunset, auto white balance is going to try to design out that filter. So picking sunny, like on that other example, and that was really designed to show you folks how the Astro filter worked. Normally I would have done the same thing and probably left it in cloudy, and maybe it would have been a little bit warmer, but that's my personal liking. And but if I left it in auto white balance, it would have taken out what the filter was trying to correct. So I don't like auto white balance for anything particularly, but a lot of people do. I want to talk about when we have a strong foreground subject we have to keep in there. One of the challenges is if I did my infinity trick on these stars, these might be a little soft. So if you have a subject like this that you could light up a little bit and actually focus on it a little bit. Now with stars, I can't use depth of field to pull it in because what happens is if I stop down to f11 or f16 like we do in a normal scenic, I'm not going to pull in enough of light here to get the stars. So we could do one or two things. We could do two exact images. We could focus on here, photograph it, go to infinity, focused on here, layer it and erase and all that stuff. Or what seems to work for me is to focus on here and then edge. And I try to make sure my foreground is far enough away where I'm close to infinity. And then I favor the infinity mark. So if I really blew these up, they're probably not as pinpoint as normal, but it gives me a good overall picture, because right now, if this was soft, it would pull my eye away. So you got to be a little bit careful if your foreground subject that's lit, in this case a lighthouse, is too close for the infinity trick by itself to work. So that's a point to keep in
If
your...
you are shooting in RAW, does the white balance matter?
You know what? It still matters if you want to minimize post-processing or get it closer to what you want in the camera, because the newer versions of Lightroom still pull up your white, close to your white balance setting. So if I'm shooting warmer, it comes up warmer. And here's how you can prove that. Some people say, no. Go outside, photograph on a sunny day and sunny. Then change your white balance to fluorescent. And I've done this actually to be creative. I've done this at sunsets where the sunset is iffy. I'll put my white balance on fluorescent, and it'll give me a funky purplish sunset, and I sort of saved the sunset that wasn't really there. I've done that in, I had a group out in Charleston years ago, and we did that. It was sort of a overcast night. We were photographing the lights over the bridge in Charleston, and everybody got this warm look just because of the lights. And I showed them by going to fluorescent, we got this really great blue-white balanced look to the bridge. And pulling it up in Lightroom, it comes up in RAW just like that. And the older Lightroom, years and years and years ago, wouldn't have done that. It would have not picked up the information from RAW and translated it into the Lightroom settings to give you what you want. The other thing that's important to know is when I pick white balance, when I look at an image behind my camera, that's a JPEG that's been processed in the camera. Same thing with sharpness. I set my sharpnesses up like in my photo shooting menu, because what I see behind the camera is what I need to know I could get to when I do post-processing, and I add some sharpening back in post-processing. So.
And do you shoot in RAW?
I shoot in RAW 100% of the time. 100% of the time. I don't shoot in JPEG at all. I'll export in JPEG, because if I'm sending it to print or putting on a website, they usually can't take a RAW image that way. But yeah, 100% in RAW. And you're right. If you shoot in RAW, you could change the white balance any way you want in post-processing, but it's another step I have to do. So it's just personal choice. A good friend of mine, Tony Sweet, he's another Singh-Ray ambassador. He, unless he's changed something and I didn't catch that in one of, because we teach programs sometimes together, he leaves his white balance for wildlife and nature always in sunny, and then he adjusts it as he's producing his image. I just like to leave it in cloudy for the warm. When I shot film, I left a warming filter on all my lenses when I shot wildlife and nature. It's just what I did. It's just Vinny's style. You might not like it. That's okay. Don't do it that way.
We hear from a lot of people that they keep the UV, I can't think of the name, the UV filter on there just for the warming effect.
Right. Well, one of the things you have to be careful for when you pick a UV filter, and it does add a little warmth. And I'm talking about general filters. There's some really good filters out there, but there's some really bad filters out there. And a lot of times when you buy a lens, a camera store, because they're trying to be nice, they'll give you a free UV filter as a protection filter. Most of those less expensive filters really don't work well. I got to tell you, I've never, when I didn't want to have a polarizer on front of my lens, particularly when I was in digital, I started to leave a polarizer on every lens and just take it off when I didn't need it. I never put a UV filter as a protection filter. In film days, I did have a warming filter. Way back then, I wasn't involved, so I used the Nikon A2 warming filter. That was my filter back in the 90s. But you want a high-grade filter. And then I remember walking in, it was years ago when I came to the Singh-Ray manufacturing plant, and Bob Singh, he said, "You ever use a clear filter, a protection filter?" And I said, "Never, Bob, sorry, I just don't." And he handed me a Hilux filter. He said, "Go outside and just look through the filter. Don't even put it on your camera." And I walked outside of the Singh-Ray office, looked at a tree across the street, picked the filter up in front of me, and saw the contrast pop. That's the first time I started using a clear filter as a protection filter if I wasn't using a polarizer in front of my lens. The Singh-Ray Hilux filter is the only clear filter I've ever used, because I use a polarizer for almost 99% of my work, except for astrophotography.
So on the Astro filter, though, how much light do you lose with that filter? Do you lose light?
You know what? I'm ashamed. I don't know, but it's not a stop. It's a very clear filter. I don't know if Howard's listening, if he knows that technical information, but I will find that, and that's something we'll find out and send that out with your email tomorrow.
Sure. And then
Never considered it because it just worked the way it did, you know.
And then what metering mode do you use for sky photos?
What metering? Most of the time with the Nikon systems, they're just so good in matrix metering. And I'm, and Canon's is, and Sony. I've shot, in mirrorless, I've shot Sony. I've shot, because I've tested a lot of cameras for workshop purposes. Everybody makes a great camera. They wouldn't be in business, guys. So I never allow camera wars to happen in my workshops. But what I do with my Nikon gear works for me with Nikon is the matrix metering is really good. I think there's less than 2% of the time I come out of matrix metering. Sometimes if I have to spot meter on something that's really contrasty, I will. When I shoot the moon, I do use spot metering a lot on that because I don't want the black to be part of the calculation. But when I'm doing the Milky Way and stuff, I just leave it in matrix metering.
So a couple more questions before you get into post. When using I think it's supposed to be a Zoom, no, when using a Zoom 14 to 24, do you calculate the time by what you are setting the lens at, like 17 millimeter as an example, calculating for the max the lens can do, i.e. 24 millimeter?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, like with my current 14 to 30, whatever I chose for my focal length, whether it's 14 millimeters or 20 millimeters, I do the calculation at the focal length that I'm picking.
Perfect.
Because again, we're dealing with angle of arc for star movement. So that's why when we use a crop sensor, we have to calculate in the fact that our 20 millimeter lens is acting like a 30 millimeter lens,
right?
Because it's your 1.5 multiplier. Some cameras are 1.2 multipliers, so you need to know what your sensor is doing for that math. Where I showed the formula of being for a crop sensor, and I used 1.5 as a multiplier as an example. It was 14, times the 1.5 divided into the 500. If it was a 1.2 sensor, it'd be 14 times 1.2 divided into 500. So you got to do the inner math first. You got to work from inside those parentheses first.
Great questions, guys.
Yeah, really, really good questions. So even though we're not doing post-processing, and hopefully, if enough of you requested Singh-Ray, I am open to put together because it'll take an hour to do some examples of post-processing and stacking for star photography, whether it's Milky Way, stars, or star trails. So that's something to be done. But these are the softwares that I'm using now. Most of the time, it's Lightroom and Photoshop. I started using recently for Milky Way Astro panel. Works really well for pulling out a lot of the colors and cleaning up some things. And I don't use it as much with the Astro filter as you would if you didn't have the Astro filter. And for star stacking, even though right now I've been doing most of it in Photoshop and Lightroom, the Starry Landscape Stacker I've been playing with, and I haven't perfected yet. But it's a great software, not for just stacking stars of Milky Way and star trails, but It's a great landscape where you could focus. You could do 10 shots and focus at key points in this, in your shots, and take 10 shots, glue them together, and have a really awesome depth of field landscape shot. So those are the things that we're learning with that. So those are the softwares that I'm doing. But like this is one you might want to look into. I believe it's a Mac and PC program. There's other stacking programs that are geared strictly for astrophotography. I picked this one because it's good for landscape and astrophotography. Photoshop and Lightroom, just as a quick, and listen, until I do that program, if somebody needed to send me an email and say, give me a couple of quick steps so I could do some stacking, I'll send you some procedures. That's easy, just so you can start to play with it. But basically, if I had 5 images that I took that I want to stack together in Lightroom, I'll highlight all 5. I'll go into edit, into photo, into edit, and where you could go edit in Photoshop, where it would open them all up in Photoshop. Down the bottom, it actually says edit as a stack in Photoshop, and then they'll all open up in layered. And then I could just, what you do is you blend them together, and I could go through those steps, and then you could get a really awesome shot, because stack shots are shorter exposure, less noise, and when you glue them all together, it starts to fill in all this stuff and make it really, really dense looking. And then the other thing is the Astro panel. This is the same image, unstacked, single image, and it allowed me to go through all these adjustments to pull this out in Astro panel. But I got to tell you, I tried it with an image that I shot without an Astro filter, one with an Astro filter. It took me half the amount of time to do it with the Astro filter. I was still under my 30-second mark with the Astro filter required. So with the software, if you guys put enough of a request in, I'll be glad to design a webinar on just how to do all this processing. I wanted to remind everybody, I remember way back in 2017, I did a webinar for you guys through Singh-Ray on photographing the eclipse. I'm hoping I get invited back. We only have 1,329 days to go for the next eclipse, which is April 2024. Listen, I've been asked, I'm trying to work out the logistics. If you guys want to send me to put you on a list just to remind you, people want me to do a workshop, and I can't take 50 people to a workshop, but I'm probably looking to take 10 people and go out like 2 days before the eclipse, really practice with the sun, how to do good sun photography and prepare for the eclipse. And then this is an image, these are images from me and my wife that we produced after that. We were selling images, obviously,
yeah,
for our work. But this was taken in Cherokee, North Carolina, and the eclipse coming and going, and the magical ring in the middle. And I'm proud to say that the 2 images that we got next to each other, this is my wife's image right there. Hers was better than mine. And but yeah, that's coming up in 2024. Put that on your calendar, and I'm going to probably run a field workshop for this event, and where we work 2 days in the field before the eclipse, and then work all day in the eclipse, and do post-processing at night after we get the eclipse shots.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. Some I've been holding on to. Yep. A quick order of business. The Astrovision filter is about half a stop.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Howard and Laura and Karen, whoever sent that information.
Top secret information coming in here.
Yeah, and that's nothing to even really be concerned about. Just don't put an ND filter in front of it.
Right. What telescope would you recommend?
Say that again, Michelle.
What telescope would you recommend, or what do you use?
It depends on what you want to do. If I love that TeleVue 85 because it's portable. And if I'm not doing tracking where I have to mount it on a tracking platform to do long exposures, then throwing it up, I've just thrown that on my Wimberley head and did moonshots. But you could also use that for long exposure photography, nebula and galaxies, if you have it on a tracking head, like Skywatch has a great one that the Teleview would mount to. So I love the Teleview optics. It's an American-made scope. It's made in Hauppauge, Long Island. It's always considered a high-quality scope. There's scopes that are better, scopes that are less. The 85 is about a $2,200 or $2,400 scope without the eyepieces, and then you have to add the eyepieces and stuff to it. The Celestron 8 has some portability because it's only 8-inch scope. I used to own a Celestron 8 when I was heavy into astronomical work. That's a favorite of mine for doing astrophotography. The clock drive on that and the GPS tracking on that is superb. I'm sure there's others. Meade makes some great stuff, but I've always been a Celestron fan with their Smith and Cassegrains. They make some less expensive scopes. You have to get a decent scope. Let's just put it that way. And that's why the Teleview 85 is my favorite scope.
Then Larry says he bought a Singh-Ray Astro filter for his Milky Way photography, and he is so glad that he did. It's so worth it. So thank you, Larry. We are glad to know that you're getting good use out of it. Keith wants to know, he said, I found the time calculations were too generous when I shot night skies in Hawaii because the islands are so much closer to the equator. Anyone else have that experience?
Well, I'll prove that out for you, Keith, if you get me a ticket to Hawaii. I haven't, again, I've shot the US. I haven't traveled around the world like some photographers, so I don't know that for a fact. I've never heard that before. And, but if you've gotten those results, I'm sure you're probably right.
If there are other people on the webinar and you've had that experience, go ahead and put it in the chat window. Maybe you guys can help each other out. David said he would love to hear that presentation on stacking. So we are making a mental note of that, David. Joe wants to know, what is Astro Panel? Do you want to go back a little bit on that?
Say that, he wants to know which one?
What is the Astro Panel?
Okay, Astro Panel is a software package called Astro Panel. You could Google it, and it ends up being a plugin in Photoshop if you have Photoshop. I believe you can run it by itself, but when I loaded it, because it found Photoshop, it put it in as a plugin. And you open it up in Photoshop with your image, and you can do more than just Astro stuff. Right now here it's set on Pro stuff, so you could do a lot of adjustments just like you could do in Photoshop. But if you go to the Astro tools, there's specific tools for running like over the Milky Way and pulling out the detail and the color. And it comes with a really nice video, and you should watch their video, because if you watch their video and just do what their video says, you don't have to be high-tech software person to get a result just like this. So Astro Panel 4.2 is their latest version. Could be higher if they're making a change that I'm not aware of. But I get the if you purchase it, they'll send you the updates for free.
Right. And Alan says he's new to astrophotography, but on an earlier attempt, I had a lot of problems with condensation forming on the lens. Does Vinny have any tips for dealing with such issues?
That's an excellent, especially in the winter when it's the best time to do astrophotography. Mm-hmm. What a lot of people do is they take their camera gear, whether it's or their telescope, and they go out and they start to play with it. You have to let it sit outside for a good 30 minutes to let it adjust to the temperature and the condensation goes away. Now, in some of the larger diameter telescopes, like the Celestron 8 I talked about, and they have the Celestron 11 and 12 and the Meade, same thing, they actually do a little heater you can wrap around the scope to sort of warm the optics. I've never tried a heater on a telephoto lens for my camera stuff, but just leaving it outside, and you have the same problem. You can't drive around in the summer photographing sunrises and sunsets in an air-conditioned car and it's 92 outside, because you're going to get the same problem. So you need to have your equipment stabilized. We did a lot of shooting in the snow last year, my wife and I, when we took a group out to Montana, and everybody needed to keep their equipment outside. You can't leave it in the warm car. because you're going to get condensation.
That's smart. If you like the silhouette in the foreground but need to cut city lights, could you use a graduated ND filter upside down?
You could actually do that, and Singh-Ray also makes a reverse grad where it's dark in the middle, and where you could get that towards the bottom and silhouette that, but it turns clearer to the top. But I would probably do your suggestion and put an upside down soft grad. Now, you have to be careful that the grad filter doesn't edge into something that you don't want to darken. So just be careful of that. So make sure, particularly when you get to the stars, that that's the clear portion of the filter. And I haven't done this, and if Howard's listening, you know, I use a lot of 100 by 150 filters in my filter holders. I wonder if we can make like a 100 by, instead of 150, 200, so you have more clear. So when you put it on top, you have some adjustment room. You don't want the edge of the filter to get in your lens, because then you're gonna have those lines that you got to deal with in post-processing, and it's gonna look terrible. Right. So possibly looking at a custom filter just for doing that is something we could talk to Singh-Ray about.
And on that subject too, we've had a few people ask about filters not yet available, but Singh-Ray makes it pretty affordable to get a custom filter made. So if you have an idea, chances are someone else had that idea too, and maybe we just want to hear about it in general. Or it may be that a custom filter is within your price range and you didn't even know it. So I would reach out to the office with any of those ideas.
Yes, Singh-Ray is very good at creating custom filters. We're experimenting now, and some of my folks are starting to order. It's not in the catalog. We're working on something called an extended grad, where it blend, you know, good for landscape photography, where you get a bigger blend, and we're doing a three-stop and a four-stop version that allows, if you have big sky photography, you could darken the sky a little bit more and have it blend into the foreground. So I'm going to be doing a blog on that probably within the next month or two, as soon as I get a few more images with that. So look for some of those custom filters, and some of them become available to the public. Right. Or you could call Singh-Ray and ask Flora or Howard or Karen. Vinny's extended grad. Yeah, I got one of those.
The more you ask for it, the faster it gets here.
Yeah.
So Bruce wants to know, can we share our efforts at Astro Photography with you and get your comments back?
Yes.
I was out last Wednesday and was in a dark sky park in northern Indiana and captured some Milky Way and Big Dipper photos. I tried to capture Saturn and its moons to get pinpoint stars, focus in live view, and increase the image to get clearer planets and stars.
And here's my email. If anybody wants to send me anything for personal critiquing, just keep in mind that I do some traveling, even during this COVID stuff. I will respond to each and every email, and even if we have to pick a time where we're going back and forth on something, I will critique and help and give suggestions to anybody that wants my help. Now, that being said, if for some reason I don't answer in a week, at least saying I'll get to this by Friday, I'll get to this by next week, it might mean I run 3 emails. This is the one that you need to use. But sometimes I get 200 or 300 emails a day. And if I accidentally junk something and you didn't hear from me, it's not intentional, please reach out again. I want you to bug me to get your answer.
Right. And a couple of tips from the audience. As far as lens condensation, there also is something called a lens muff or a lens heater that you can look into. Vinny, do you have an opinion on lens muffs and heaters?
Yeah, actually, when we shoot in the winter, last year we were in Montana and it was -8, wind chill -24. A lens muff, actually, you could also get one that'll, not on a big giant telephoto lens, but you can put the whole camera in it and keep the camera stabilized, and just the lens elements sticking out of the front. And there's several of those. If you just Google that, you'll come up with 4 or 5 different manufacturers. Hunt's Photo, B&H, they all carry that stuff.
Okay, quick tip and then a question. Astro panel happens to be on sale right now for another 24 hours. So if you guys are interested in trying that, that's on sale.
And that's less than I paid for it, so grab it, guys.
And then Alan said, any thought on removing airplane trails from star trail photos?
If you get an airplane trail that's undesirable,
Yeah.
you have to be a little bit careful, because if it's cutting the star trail, it's hard to just clone it out. But you can clone it out. You just have to be careful and use the smallest circle and blow up the star, the plane trail, and just slowly clone it out. That's one way to do it. If it's only in one image, if you did stacked imaging, there's a very good chance that when you do the stacked blend, because it's different than the rest and it doesn't match the rest, it might take it out by itself. I've had that happen. But it also might happen if you get a meteor streak when you do some of that stacking.
Right. Do you use, I don't know how to pronounce this, do you use a Bathinov mask for focusing on stars?
No, I don't. That's a better way to do it. I just haven't gotten that far, and I'm happy with the results. So, I'm a keep it simple type of guy, as much, even though my background's engineering, I love toys. When I'm out in the field, again, that's why I use filters, because I like, because I can control the light, get it done, and I don't have to do a whole bunch of post-processing. So no, I haven't tried that stuff. If I start getting back into my telescope more, I may go that direction. But I haven't done it, so it's hard for me to tell you how.
And do you happen to know the website for that Astro panel? We have a lot of...
Astropanel.com.
Couldn't be easier than that. Astropanel.com. A couple people have asked.
Yep. Let me just confirm that.
Towards the end of the questions. Where in Mexico should we go to shoot the eclipse?
I am just starting to do the logistics, and I'm probably not going to take my group to Mexico. But here's one of the logistics problems I have: watching the weather. Of course, the further south you go, the better. I haven't looked at the exact track. There's not a lot of places that have published it yet. But that's definitely something I'm going to, obviously have fine-tuned before I offer a workshop. I am redoing my website, and by 2021, it's going to be more educational. That information for that eclipse will start to appear on my website. So if you go to, VinnyColucci.com, or, and I haven't done newsletters lately because I was on a project for a year, so I haven't really been teaching workshops this year. And then COVID came in and made it even worse. You could sign up for my newsletter from my website, and I'm going to be starting the newsletter thing again the first week in January. And the newsletter is going to be an educational newsletter. We'll have this type of information, including that eclipse, as I gather more information about it.
That would be great.
Including the logistics of how I'm going to get people in the right place for the right weather at the right time.
So we have a comment about photography near the equator. William lived in Latin America for 30 years and has not seen marked effects due to latitude, but especially when living in Ecuador, found big differences at various altitudes.
Oh, okay. Does he know why?
I don't know. William, do you know why?
Yeah, so if he's listening, if he could share that, that'd be great. And the other thing is, Ecuador, I'm jealous. I'm jealous he lives there, because that's a great place to do photography from what I understand. Never been there. It's on my bucket list. I'm jealous. But if he knows why that happens, let him share it now if he knows.
Interesting. And the website, a couple people said they couldn't find it. It's astropanel.it, not .com. So
okay, thank you.
.it. So there's that. After the other question we've gotten a few times, this is being recorded, and we will send you a link so that you can rewatch or share with a friend. You'll get an email from Singh-Ray little bit later tonight, and it will have a special offer in there as well. So if you want to try some of these filters that Vinny has talked about, you'll be able to do so.
And Michelle, when we all close down here, I will email you that PDF file immediately.
Perfect. So I think we have it all covered. We've gotten to all of the questions. Vinny, thank you so much. We love having you on as a presenter.
You're making me blush.
So as you guys are out there taking your pictures, hopefully take a look at Vinny's photography as an inspiration. And we hope that you'll join us again next month for another webinar with Colleen Miniak. So thank you guys, everyone, and have a great night.
And remember, I got a photo of Santa flying across the moon.
Yeah, you did.
Good night, guys.